In just 2 weekends, we had 7 major tournaments for the Digimon TCG, and the results are crazy. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Steven. I'm your true champion, and as I'm sure you're all well aware, this past weekend was Gen Con, and with Gen Con came 6 amazing major Digimon tournaments. Alongside that was the Otakon Regionals the week prior. With all these events, we have probably the most amount of results we've ever had at the beginning of a brand new format, this one being the English BT9 format. A lot of people coming into BT9 thought it was going to be super combo-centric, OTK decks were going to dominate, and while they are correct, those are coming in droves and definitely have the most representation, there are a ton of rogue picks / surprise choices that can perform crazy well, especially in the hands of a talented pilot. I hope to in this video showcase not only how awesome some of these players are for putting up the numbers with these decks, but also what you might want to prepare for any upcoming store championships or other regionals happening in the 2022 competitive season. If y'all are excited for this video and want to see more like it in the future, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell for notifications so you know when my videos go live for you. Alright, y'all, I don't think I'd be doing this meta recap video justice if I didn't talk about the craziest occurrence that's happened over the past 2 weekends. Reaper is back and better than ever, putting up some crazy performance numbers in these major events. Reaper, as of recording this video, has won a regional, an Ultimate Cup, and a DC1 Grand Prix, and almost all of the decks look like this one, which is the most recent list that did well. Huge shout out to Josh, aka Fang, that used this list to win the DC1 Online Grand Prix. Super awesome performance, and it's only 1 card different from the list that Luca initially played to win Otakon Regionals, and that list was a card-for-card copy of the Japanese BT10 Reaper list that won the Malaysian Evo Cup. And if you guys don't know, Reaper is a pretty cool strategy revolving around Mother D Reaper as a way to gain guaranteed resources, you abusing the extra searchers you're allowed to play to just let you have a slew of tech options in archetype, things like Gatekeeper, things like Palace Head, and even Creep Hands to either gain defense, control your opponent's board, or straight up stall them out of the game. On top of that, from BT9, we have some awesome inclusions that can help accelerate the deck, like X Antibody, as well as cards that can add to your ability to punish or control your opponent's board, like Death Xmon. The originalists from Japan played 4 copies of Starmon to help counter Psychomon that was popular in Bielstramon or even purple variants at the time. And the reason why I think people are really shocked that D-Reaper is doing so well is we thought we had left D-Reaper format. You know, we were all terrified of it at the beginning of EX2, and then for some reason it didn't actually perform that well, and so we all kind of put it to the wayside, but here it is, causing a big old stink in the beginning of a brand new format, and a lot of players just don't know what to do. And believe it or not, it's one of the most consistent decks out there, because as long as you see Searchers and see Reaper, you have a way to win the game guaranteed. I'm letting you know right now, Reaper is a deck you're probably going to play against in future events in BT9. Be ready for it, but I do think a lot of decks right now, especially the OTK decks that can gain plus security attack, have plenty of ways to interact with this archetype as long as you put in the testing. Speaking of old decks that I feel people didn't hype up at the beginning of BT9 but still should be respected, we have Imperialdramon. This is a list that got 4th place in the same DC1 online event as Josh piloting Reaper, and I feel like it's a really good representation of what a current Imperial list looks like. You have powerful ways to maximize your consistency, like plenty of ways to gain memory and filter through your free combo pieces. You have ways to also play around counters that exist for your deck, like the Parasaurmon, who allows you to play around Psychomon or other cost-reducing stoppers, which is pretty cool. And you have things like Leomon, who could potentially pass your opponent's turn while gaining you extra resources against maybe pesky OTK decks that put themselves all the way down to 0. On top of that, the same old song and dance as ever, if you high roll with this deck, you can just obliterate anyone you want to. It's one of the few decks that actually has interaction with D-Reaper's board, so if you are expecting some more control decks / annoying things to be happening in BT9, Imperial is one of the few decks that just stares at them and go, I don't think I care, I'm gonna win anyway. Don't shoot the messenger here, but one last deck I want to talk about before we move on to some other winning deck lists is Security Control. While yes, it didn't put up any huge numbers, I think maybe 1 or 2 topping spots, It's around. People are still playing it. The inclusion of DeathXmon from BT9 is an amazing tool for combating wide boards / people who just love playing tamer cards. Oh, what's that? You have 4 different level 5s and 2 tamers? Let me just drop this DeathXmon for free, kill your entire board, and then summon MetalGarurumon to recover to 6. It's your turn now. While a lot of decks have ways to stop themselves from dying to Digimon or select forms of removal, things like Chaos Degrade or Flame Hellscythe are almost impossible to interact with or stop. Your best bet is if you're playing a black deck to play Congo, or if you're playing a red deck to play ADP or some kind of effect that allows you to turn off option cards like WarGreymon from BT1. Overall, I don't think security control is ever going to die in the English meta, nor do I think it'll ever be super popular to where you have to respect it in every tournament you go to, but it's one of those decks to have in the back of your mind, definitely playtest against, because if you're unfamiliar with the matchup, that's ultimately what's going to lead to your downfall versus the deck just being better than yours. Moving on to some decks that we don't have hard stats for. This is the MetalGarurumon X antibody deck that won one of the in-person regionals in Gen Con. This deck was piloted by someone by the name of Final Glory, and he did an amazing job showcasing how consistent and I think solid this deck is right now. If you ask me, there are 2 most consistent decks in the format. There's Reaper, simply because it just plays 20 of the main card it always needs, and then there's MetalGarurumon X antibody because it has so many ways to search for its pieces or just hard draw extra cards. And this list honestly feels like a shocking variant, not one that's as focused on consistency and more focused on having tech inclusions like 3 copies of Madoki Betamon to help you combat the other memory gain decks. Almost every single deck is playing like 2 to 4 copies of Mem Boost, as well as other decks like Alphamon who have tons of Digimon effects to gain memory. From there, we're also seeing things like Sagittarius mode as a 4th copy of WarGreymon X antibody that has a different style of effect that can interact with your opponent's board versus just gain extra aggression, and we're even seeing the BT1 MetalGarurumon make a showcase. Honestly, I'm surprised I haven't seen this card in more MetalGarurumon decks, because thanks to the ability of Gabumon X antibody as well as Garurumon X antibody to give you extra targets for this Digimon's effect to summon, it's honestly insane to me how much value you could create. At this point, I'm debating whether or not we play the BT1 Garurumon to let you restand when you attack to gain even more aggression on Mega. I will say, as strong and consistent as this deck is, it does have some bad matchups, i.e. D-Reaper. Because you don't interact so well against Digimon that don't have levels, all they have to do is get 2 Gatekeepers in play with 6 sources, and there's next to nothing you can do about it. Your best bet is to try to rush them down with your early level 5 game to try to go for a big X antibody / Omnimon blitz play. Overall, though, I'm super impressed by how strong this deck is. If you're someone who has been grinding at it to get better, I promise you are going to be rewarded. Up next, we have the top 4 placing WarGreymon X antibody deck from the same regional, piloted by friend of the channel, Beck, aka MTG Girl. When I found out that my pal Beck not only got top 4 at a regional, but got top 4 with WarGreymon X antibody, I was super impressed, because out of all of the X antibody decks, this was the one that I kind of wrote off because it didn't seem that consistent. Sure, it was explosive, but it felt super reliant on the X antibody option card specifically, and I would just rather play something like Garurumon X or Alphamon. But after Beck showed me her deck and I thought a bit more about it, I was like, this deck is actually super well suited right now in the format, because the way it interacts with its opponent's security is by gaining a bunch of plus security attack and by shutting off their option cards with things like BT1 or WarGreymon. So against all these pseudo control decks that are trying to like lock people out of the game or stall their way to victory, WarGreymon X stares at them and goes, not in my house. Plus, there's even some variations that could be done to this deck. I've seen yellow versions that play RiseGreymon and RiseGreymon X antibody alongside the yellow BT4 WarGreymon. I've seen versions that play EX1 WarGreymon, as well as different kinds of MetalGarurumon lineups to gain value from your various evolution lines. Overall, I think this deck is performing interestingly well, and I think it's very well suited to do well in future events if people pilot it as well as Beck did. That brings us to the GrandisKuwagamon deck that Russell Lepar used to get top 16 at the DC1 online event held by Gen Con, which subsequently inspired many others to build a similar Grandis deck that they then used to get top 8, top 16s, top 32s. And that's why I want to talk about this version of Grandis, because it feels like an innovation on what otherwise was pretty solved at the beginning of the format. Big props to Russell here. He's always been someone that loves to lab, loves to come up with his own unique ways to build decks that hopefully will counter the meta, and this one is no different. I think the most notable and surprising inclusion are these 2 copies of Sneemon here, which, if you don't know, is the level 4 security Digimon that came out in the Imperial starter deck. I know, there were other level 4s in there besides XVmon and Stingmon, and Sneemon was one of them. Basically, he's a needle spray that's also an extra body on board you can use to attack your opponent with, which really does help the OTK strategy of GrandisKuwagamon, because if they attack you, you can punish them by getting basically 1 extra attack on your clock to kill them. On top of that, we do see the red package of Hero and ADP to help you deal again with these control-y / like security bomb based decks, and we have a security bomb of our own by the inclusion of Ground Fang, which is essentially Terror Cluster, but it also targets a suspended Tamer as well. And Russell goes on to talk about some of the changes he would make, some of the things that didn't work in this Facebook post that he did about his finish, and a lot of people took this to heart, and they played pretty much this exact list in future events, and I know some of them got top 8, I know some of them got top 16, but instead of talking about them, I kind of want to talk about where the list kind of came from / where they took inspiration from. Overall, though, I think this list is super cool, and personally speaking, if I plan on playing Grandis anytime soon, it's going to be something more like this and a little less streamlined. And if you guys thought the X antibody decks were done, there was still one more we had to talk about, arguably the king of X antibody, Alphamon or Yukin. Alongside D-Reaper, Alphamon was the only archetype that got 2 victories over the past 2 weekends, both at regional level events. This one was the one piloted by Joseph Robinson on Sunday's DC1 online regional that I myself went X3 in. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that. We're instead going to talk about how cool this deck is. I just got done talking about a really cool teched out Grandis list. Here's a really cool teched out Alphamon list with both Congo and Breath of the Gods, alongside main deck X antibodies, as well as Sunerizaemon, which is a nice sight to see, giving my BT7 X antibody nostalgia a little tickle. I think the inclusion of both Congo and Breath of the Gods is really impressive because it feels like the easiest way to respect big security threats like Chaos Degrade, Gatekeeper, or even various other ways to like bounce or you can tuck them to the bottom of the deck, whatever it might be. Combine that with the protection allotted to you by WarGreymon alongside your slew of extra memory gain shenanigans like Dorumon, Coolboy, Yuji, so on and so forth. This deck can certainly wipe away your opponent's security, guaranteed, and then go into an awesome finishing move on the following turn. I've always said Alpha or Yukin feels like the safest OTK deck because it's the only one that doesn't actually have to kill you on the turn it goes for a big burst. It definitely can hold back, just build up, get a free or Yukin value turn, and then go from there using all of that extra advantage. Plus, it does have that feeling of the better you are with it, the better it'll be for you in almost every single event, and I think that just goes to show how important, again, player expression is in any tournament. Joseph and the other young man that piloted Alphamon in the IRL regional not only had to be the best Alphamon players in the room, probably beating tons of mirror matches, but they also had to be the best player in the room to win with this deck because everyone was prepared for it, because at the beginning of BT9, this was the boogeyman of the format. And it probably still is. Yes, things like D-Reaper and things like Security Control are annoying and people always complain about them and misplay against them, but this is the deck you have to know how to play against if you want any shot of taking down a big BT9 event, no questions asked. And finally, bringing it all home is another OTK deck, but for once, it's not an X antibody OTK deck, it's an AncientGreymon OTK deck. And this deck was piloted to a first and second place finish by none other than friend of the channel, Mario from Mario's Gaming World. Absolutely stellar job, my dude. Way to bring back an old classic and just show people the power of this deck still to this day. Sure, fancy things like Alphamon can combo people out and multi-attack and get extra turns. MetalGarurumon can attack 3 times off of just ultimates and then attack with a Mega. WarGreymon can gain plus security while attacking. But the OG, build in the raising area, come out and do 8+ damage in a single turn is still going to be AncientGreymon, and Mario did a good job of showing everyone that that is still the case. And this list might look simple, but it's actually kind of complex, and I think built to combat the format. Originally, we saw the Chungman list from BT7 play things like Alteris mode and tons of extra ways to gain sources so that way you could counter any blue hybrid Tomihimis in security, but due to the new restriction list, blue hybrid is kind of not a problem anymore for this deck's main strategy, so we no longer see the Alteris mode and we instead see the inclusion of powerful removal options like Gaia Force to again punish these OTK decks that don't have protection for their big level 6 stacks. Alongside that, we see extra ways to protect our AncientGreymon stack like Lightning Joust and Hero to make our DP, I think the max is like 18, so that way even if we hit into an Alpha or Yukon, we can still out DP it and survive, and thanks to things like Aldamon's Inheritable already stopping option cards, there's very few things that can actually get rid of an AncientGreymon dealing 6+ damage. And the reason I'm really showing this deck off to you, besides it winning one of these major events, is because I want to point out to you that because the format is so, I don't want to say simplified, but we have a very good idea of what decks can do right now, it's totally possible to find other options out there. You haven't seen me talk about things like Bielstermon or Mastodon today because they kind of weren't around as much as people thought. But neither was this, and it still performed super well, and I think this deck, alongside many others from older formats, have a place in BT9. They might not be as flashy or as fast as these OTK decks, but that doesn't mean they're worse. If you have any sort of way to defend yourself against these OTK decks, or straight up beat them before they beat you, like AncientGreymon kind of does, then you definitely have a shot in BT9, and it might be worth trying out. So let this deck be an example to you of not only a super cool deck that you should try out for yourself that my friend did really well with, but also as to what's possible for older archetypes in this new world of the BT9 format for the Digimon TCG. And boom, there you guys go. That wraps up all the top performing decks for the beginning of the Digimon TCG BT9 format. Let me know what you think. Do you like these decks? Do you hate them? Are you someone who's going to follow the meta or find a way to counter it? Let me know in the comments. With all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Peace.